So let's talk about the unfinished stories left on the table in BFA. We all have a suspicion that Blizzard basically did a wad on BFA. I don't think they outright just did a wad, but close enough. I don't think they told all of the story they intended to tell. I think they did cut it short. They rushed through the last bit. They gave up. And I'm disappointed that that's how they chose to go about it. I can understand that they may have thought it the best possible way to just satisfy the player base, just be done with BFA and be done with the Azerite armor and all the things that we hated about it. But really, I think that just makes it worse, because now all we're going to remember are those things we hated about it. They took all of the things that we could have loved about it had they completed them and gave us those storylines, and just scrapped them, just said, let's move on to the next expansion. So, to me, they did BFA an injustice, which they had already done BFA an injustice in the way they were trying to tell too many stories at once, and they just could not justify all of those stories in game. It was just too much. There was no way. So we're all familiar with some of the more common complaints about, how we didn't get that cannon firing at the end. We have no idea what they intended to do with that still. At the very least, they could just come out and admit to us. We all pretty much know. They could just come out and say, we had intended to do all of this stuff, and we just couldn't, or we collectively decided it was better to move on. We called it a failure, we cut our losses, however they want to word it. And they could at least tell us what their intentions were. Now, if there are storylines that they intend to come back to, that they don't want to tell us for spoiler reasons, that's fine. But obviously we're not going to fire the cannon. They could at least tell us what they intended to do. Why was that cannon going to be fired? As for some of the other storylines that I think were just left on the table, I think there were a lot of stories that we got in questing and that did not really register as a whole. There was just so much else going on, so many bigger stories they were also trying to tell, that we didn't pay as much attention to what was going on in the quests. There are some quest chains that got enough attention because of their subject matter that they were noticed. But I want to talk about the Tortolan. I'm disappointed in that, partially because I think it left some lore on the table. We could have just learned so much from questing as a Tortolan. Lore-wise, there was endless possibilities, because this is an ancient race. They've been around forever. They've been on Azeroth, collecting scrolls, exploring. We got all these little, other than just the little mini daily quests about Torga and all that, we got all these little storylines about Torga. If there's anything that I enjoyed quest-wise, gameplay-wise in BFA, it was just the Tortolans and any quest involving their stories. I must say, I did cry. I cried when we couldn't save the Turtle Loa, because this was a giant turtle Loa who was an ancient wise being. Who knows what we could have learned? And they did it in such a sad way. I did also cry, yes, when we had to kill Ysera because she had been corrupted. I cried in that cinematic of Legion, but that's because they put it in a cinematic and really just pulled on those heartstrings. But I got over that well enough because I'm not as into the dragonflight as some people, and despite my love for dragons and mythical creatures, I'm just not trusting of the dragonflight. There's something about them that's always been off-putting for me. But that, and, you know, Elune did just kind of yoink her up into the sky. She's fine. She's not gone. We still have Ysera, so it's fine. And I kind of knew that that was going to be the case there. But the turtle Loa, that's a whole different kind of sad. So, okay, I cried. I'm admitting it. But we could have, had we continued playing through more Tortolan quests and gotten a more complete picture of their history, just how ancient they were, how long they've been around, the places they've explored, where they may have gone, including more dragon stuff, like the Dragon Isles, which some have speculated that Blizzard did intend to put somewhere in BFA. Again, that would have been too much, though. We would have had dragons on top of old gods on top of some Horde Alliance war that was really a farce because it was Sylvanas stuff and just, it was too much. But that's why we lost out on some of the smaller stories that were in there that could have had potentially huge lore impact. They could have filled in some gaps. They could have closed some old loose ends for us from old world stuff. They could have given us some insight into the Chronicles, if you will, into what may or may not be true in the Chronicles, because the Tortolans, they may have found writings or scrolls that are significantly ancient, which contradict the Chronicles and Titan stuff. And yeah, we could have really had a blast with that. Well, those of us who like that sort of thing, who really just want to go exploring with an ancient Tortolan and find some juicy lore bits, we could have had a good time with that. And I'm disappointed that we didn't get anything really with the Tortolan after we did the initial questing, their quest chains for the Horde and the Alliance, and then we just kind of, we had some dailies, we built some rep with them. We didn't do much. I just feel like that was completely dropped. Why? The Tortolan had so much potential. They had more potential than the pandas. They're turtles. They're amphibious. You're not gonna have a Pandarian going who knows how deep into the oceans and exploring ancient sunken cities and finding ancient buried underwater scrolls and who knows what all else. Tortolan had the potential to unlock so much lore. And I wish we could have played through some more Tortolan quests that were relevant to the Ajara story. Like, you know, we could have had Tortolan witnesses or something to the event, and maybe unlock them as a allied race. I would have loved to have a Tortolan. I still want a Tortolan. And maybe once we got a Tortolan, I think the allied race is what they start at level 20. So we could have started the Tortolan maybe at level 1 and played through. Started as a level 1 Tortolan and done something like what we did with our pandas, where instead of starting off, as a higher level character, and instead of starting off as a member of the Horde or Alliance, we're a Tortolan. We're a Tortolan who is relatively young in the sense of a Tortolan, and we're ready to go out and explore and discover scrolls and mysteries and old world architect and old world artifacts and all sorts of adventures up to level whatever. Like, let's say our level 1 Tortolan plays up to level 10 as a Tortolan in the old world before anything, before our current time and before anything happened, maybe even before the Sundering, just this ancient Azeroth that we don't know. And then something happens, maybe the Sundering happens, who knows. And we get a cinematic, and then after the cinematic, we're in current timeline, we're in current World of Warcraft, and we have been caught up and we now know a little more about the Tortolan, about Azeroth before the Sundering, who knows. And we can now join the Horde or the Alliance. We have a choice as a Tortolan, because I do think they were potentially intended to be a neutral allied race in place of the Pandaren. And maybe they would have also come with their own special class, like the Pandaren. We didn't get just the Pandaren race, we got monks. So maybe we would have gotten a bard. Everyone wants a bard. I could potentially see the Tortolan being bards. Only because scrolls, in my mind, somewhere along the lines equal sheet music, so I could see it. I don't think that's what we would have gotten. I still don't know. This is another one of those where I don't like talking about systems and gameplay, but I don't know that Blizzard is able to implement a bard type system, and we'll just leave it at that. I just don't know about that. They may have even been something like spirit death related. We could have had our necromancer. I don't personally think we need one. I know people want to see that. That's one of the classes that's being asked for. We have a death knight. Why do we need a necromancer? I feel like we have the Forsaken. Oh yeah, okay, they're a race, not a class. They don't do a bunch of death stuff. Why they don't do a bunch of death stuff, I don't know. Why we couldn't have liches from the start, like our own liches, that would have been cool. But there's just so much already. And we have demonology warlocks, so when we got demon hunters, they took our metamorphosis away. They took other things away. They took from the warlocks and gave to the demon hunters because they didn't want to have two classes with the same abilities and this, that, and the other. So I feel like if we were to get a necromancer, we'd have a similar situation in which somebody somewhere, some of our current classes, races, something would have to lose out. And I don't like when that happens, because we played all the way through and this was lore, this was our character, they had these abilities, and all of a sudden we lose them because now we have another, something else has the same abilities. I don't like that. So I don't want them, if that's how they're going to do it, if every time they introduce something new and it happens to have the same abilities, and they're going to take those abilities from a previous class or race, just so that we don't have two of the same abilities. I don't like that. I don't think they should do that. If they're going to do that, I don't want anything new. I think our demonology warlocks should be able to do the same thing as some of the demon hunters. There should be some overlap. They learn the same stuff, more or less. They were exposed to the same things, same reasons. So, if they were going to give us necromancy, I could potentially see the Tortolan with that ability, and there's going to be a lot of people, come on alien, that's way out there. Yes, they're turtles. They're animals, they're adorable, they're earthly, they're natural. So I could see why people might think, if we got Tortolans, they'd be a druid of some sort. Or a healer. Or potentially a tank. Because, well, they have a shell. So, I can see it. We'd have Tortolan Bushido or something, so that we wouldn't have a warrior. Which might also be cool. But the reason I can see them as potentially having some sort of death-related or soul-related power is because they would have been around for a lot of things. They would have been around pretty much for anything lower related, anything Sunder related, anything Legion related. They would have been around for some old god stuff, so maybe something death and voidy. They would have been through a lot. And they would have been around for Ner'zhul, Arthas, Lich King-y stuff. So it's even conceivable to have Tortolan as Death Knights. We had pandas as Death Knights for the same reason, because they had been around. It made sense lore-wise. I just think it would be cool to have Tortolan from way back when. These ancient beings that lived through it all and could give us a different perspective, could give us the Tortolan perspective, an eyewitness account of what they lived through. And since they're amphibious, let's say they're one of Azeroth's oldest races. You know, we said the trolls are, but the Tortolan, the way the Tortolan talk and the way the text reads, I think they've been a race of Azeroth for as long as anyone. So we really could have gotten ancient perspectives on just about everything, including the Titans showing up and building their constructs. And since we had a lot of quests that involved Titan construct stuff, and what they were doing with some of those facilities and their experimentations, we could have gotten some Tortolan lore bombs regarding that. So I feel confident that Blizz were intending to give us more than what they did. This may not be what they were intending to give us. I may be biased. I may just really have wanted a Tortolan. But again, I think part of the reason I really wanted a Tortolan was because I do think that they at least intended to give us something juicy lore-wise with them. They had that potential there. And there were hints that the Tortolan knew some stuff. There were comments made when you're questing and you're doing some Tortolan stuff, some daily stuff. There are comments made by Tortolan characters about Ajar and having been around before she became what she became, and they have been dealing with her Naga ever since, and just different things. Different little lore things that, you know, when we're questing, sometimes we're just, especially if we're grinding rip or just doing dailies or whatever, for whatever reason. Sometimes we log in, especially if we're not happy with an expansion or how our characters feel, whether it's because of gameplay or changes that they've made to the class we're playing or whatever. It's almost like an obligation for us. It's not something we're doing for fun. It's something we feel like we have to do to get it over with. I don't like when a game feels that way. And at least a good portion of BFA did feel that way for many players, which is understandable. It even felt that way for me. And so, yeah, when it feels like it's a chore, when your game, the thing you do for fun, your hobby, feels like a chore, for one thing, that's just sad. But for another, you tend to just, you don't get in that game and get immersed and listen and role play and do like what we used to do. You just get in there, you hurry through whatever daily quests you have to do, and that's it. You're not paying attention to subtexts and things that are being said, just this the everyday, every time you click on a random Tortolan and they say something, and it doesn't really sink in. So maybe we missed something because we were just trying to get through it. Just trying to play through the start of BFA and praying it was going to get better, and it did. Got better. But the reason I'm not satisfied with BFA is because I think they scrapped it too soon. They basically gave up. It's not always about the systems. So, yeah, Azerite armor sucked. We were all ticked off about it. Some of the new things they tried, it wasn't working for us. But don't make the matter worse by taking away the things that could have been really good and making up for it. Like, if those things, if they had given us that, if they had given us more, if they had stuck to whatever story they were going to tell, yeah, we weren't happy with the slow progression, but if they had stuck to their guns and given us, like, we might have understood, we might have forgiven them for it, had it been worth it. And I suspect it may have been worth it if they had put the time and effort into that, and instead of trying to fix their Azerite armor mistake. I mean, hey, the corrupted gear was fine. Okay, it was fine. It was better than what we had started off with. That particular system was part of BFA. It was something we were going to have to deal with. We know that when we go to a next expansion anyway, they have a habit of changing everything on us again, so it wouldn't have mattered. So we could have just stuck it out. I wish everyone had just sucked it up and kept their mouths shut and just dealt with it. Just dealt with the systems so that we could get the story they were trying to tell, so that we could at least determine whether or not that story was worth it, whether or not the other stories that they may have been trying to tell were worth it. And then once we got to the end, then if they were worth it, we might have been a little less harsh, and on Blizzard we might have been, alright, yeah, this sucked, that sucked, but everything, at least you gave us a good story. However, if they didn't deliver after taking their time and with all the other things that were wrong with BFA, we could have roasted them hard. Okay, we could have really justified being displeased with BFA, to say the least, to put it mildly. And we wouldn't be in this situation now where we're questioning, did they pull a wad on us? Did they cut story out just to get through it, just to hurry on to the next expansion? And yeah, did we also miss out on getting to play as a turtle? I want a Tortolan. But I want the Tortolan to be done right. If we were to have gotten a Tortolan, I would have liked, like I said, a good Tortolan storyline, and reasons to have Tortolan, and reasons to play as Tortolan in ways that it makes sense in the lore and in the game. And maybe when we're done with whatever we're doing in the Shadowlands, we can get at least some of that. Maybe they can salvage some of what they were gonna do with that in BFA. I don't know. I guess it depends on what sort of Azeroth we return to and what they have planned for the future. But it would have been nice to get a witness and get a different telling of some of what the Chronicles explain and say and do. We've gotten what some people call retcons, but it's more like a retelling with additional information. And I think that's a good thing. I'm not angry about that. I'm not angry about having lore that we thought we knew retold from a different perspective or with additional information. I don't think that that's bad writing or being cheap in some way or giving us or rehashing old lore. I don't think that that's that. I think there was lore that had to be left on the table before in previous expansions, and certainly way back in the day when most of us were reading the quest text and figuring it out and exploring the world and getting our lore that way. And so now they can give us cinematics of an ancient race's memory, or like what they did with Ajara for her Warbringers. They can show us what happened. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. I just would have liked to also had the option to play through it as an ancient race, to really explore the Tortolan as a race, but I feel like we didn't get all of what Blizzard had intended to give us with them either. And maybe there were other quest lines and storylines just like that went unnoticed and were left on the table. There seemed to be other things going on in the zones. I feel like we didn't fully explore the zones to our best. We didn't get the most out of them. There were things in the zones that we may have noticed them and thought, wonder what that's there for, wonder when we're gonna get to that. And I feel like we just didn't. So I am disappointed that BFA ended the way it did. And not just because of the whole N'Zoth thing, because yes, the old gods need their own expansion. But because I feel like the old gods were not the only ones who got cheated out of their story. Sorry to be a little Tortolan heavy, but like I said, I'm biased, and of the potential storylines that may have been just dropped, that was the one I was looking forward to. That was my main reason for wanting to continue getting allied races, because I thought we might get a Tortolan and get some really good lore and questing out of it. But I'm done complaining for a while.